Hey explorers, welcome back on our exciting journey into the frontier. Today is our last lesson and we're going to see if Lewis and Clark actually made it to the Pacific Ocean. I don't know. Did they make it safe? Did they get home safely? We're going to find out today. So remember, President Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark to explore Louisiana Territory and do 3 tasks. Find new plants and animals. They did that one. Make friends with the Native Americans. They did that one, but remember, they did meet some tribes that were not very friendly. And then the task was to find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. And we knew from our last lesson that that probably was not going to happen, but they still wanted to get to the Pacific Ocean. So today we're going to see, did they make it to the Pacific Ocean? Did they make it home okay? We're going to see, but let's go over our vocabulary words first. Here we go. Canyons, steep-sided rocky valleys formed by water. Of all the canyons in North America, the Grand Canyon was her favorite. Communities, groups of people who lived together in the same place. The city was made up of many small communities. Contentment, being happy and satisfied. The cat stretched in contentment after its long nap. Current, a strong flow of water moving in a particular direction. The current pulled the logs swiftly down the river. Steered, guided or directed the movement of something. The farmer steered the cattle up the mountains. All right, friends, let's get started on our lesson today and see if they made it. The closer Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, Sacagawea, and their friends came to the Pacific, the more Native American people they met. This land was home to many Native Americans who had lived there and settled in communities for a long, long time. So they lived in groups of people, okay? So they lived together in communities, like we have communities. I live in Oliver Springs community. You might live in the Norris community or the Lake City community. So you have lots of little communities all around your area. With the help of the Shoshone and the Nez Perce, course of discovery, the Rocky Mountains, which stood between them and the Pacific Ocean. A new powerful river began in these mountains. The captains hoped to ride it downhill to the ocean, but the Nez Perce warned, in some places, this river rushes through a narrow rocky canyons, moving so quickly and powerfully that it's difficult to control a boat there. So they're in a steep little valley. So you got big, huge rocks on either side in this steep little valley. You could be hurt if your boat hits the canyon walls or the sharp rocks sticking out of the water. Does not sound like something I want to do. See here, see how you got tall rocks on either side? And here's your water rushing. You got rocks in the water. You got other things sticking out. I would not want to get in that. William Clark and the group's best canoeists climbed the rocks to look down at this part of the river. So a canoeist is someone who paddles a canoe. They heard the roar of the water charging through the narrow canyon even before they saw it. Walking atop the rock rim above, Clark answered the canoeists, or asked the canoeist, "What do you think?" "Captain," the canoeist answered, "I expect to play my violin at our next campsite downriver after we all get safely through this canyon." So he thinks he can make it through the canyon. Hope he's right. Clark grinned. "That's what I wanted to hear. Let us find the others." The men pushed off from the shore, and the pirogues and canoes plunged into the rapids. The mighty current, strong flow of water, pushed and pulled the boats, but working together, they steered or guided the boats around rocks and away from the canyon walls, keeping their balance whenever the river threatened to tip over the boats. Finally, they shot out the other end of the rocky canyon and into calm water. John Shields turned to his young friend, George Chanian. "What do you think, George?" Chanian answered, "I was just starting to enjoy myself. Do you think they have any more of those around here?" Both men laughed. Soon afterward, the men landed on the island in the middle of the river, just short of the place where the river emptied into the ocean. There, with the help of neighboring Native Americans, they survived another long, cold, rainy winter. At last, the weather cleared, and they were able to travel the rest of the way to the Pacific Ocean. So, if you can see, they were like going over these crazy areas. Like if you've ever been whitewater rafting, that's what imagine it would be like for them, whitewater rafting, but in a canoe. So, not me. I don't think I could have done it. There before them was the sight they had dreamed of seeing, the Pacific Ocean. Some of the men cheered, others stood in silent contentment. So that means they stood happy and quietly looking at the Pacific Ocean. Sacagawea was amazed. She had never seen an ocean, a picture of one. Clark heard that a whale had washed up on a nearby beach and took Sacagawea to see it. She told him, I have traveled a long way with you to see the great waters, and now I have seen this monstrous whale as well. I am so happy to see the ocean. Then she walked along the sand, happily letting the waves wash over her feet. It's kind of how I feel the first time I ever went to a beach. I walked out onto the sand and walked straight to the water and let the water hit me on my feet. I'd never seen the beach and the ocean before when I was little, so the first time I'd ever seen it, I was pretty amazed. It was pretty cool. On March 23rd, 1806, nearly two years after first leaving St. Louis, the Corps of Discovery turned to head for home. They had mapped a great deal of the Louisiana Territory and beyond, from the Mississippi River to the Pacific. So that means they've been able to draw maps of the areas of the lands they had traveled. They now knew how to get to the Pacific. They could take the Missouri River to the Rockies, cross the Rockies on foot, and then take other rivers to the Pacific Ocean. They had made friends with many Native Americans. They found out that no single river ran all the way from the Mississippi to the Pacific. They had learned many animals, birds, fish, and insects. They had more adventures on the journey home, of course, but in the end, everyone got back safely, except for a few who chose not to go back. John Colter, the man from whom the Teton Sioux had taken a horse, told Meriwether Lewis, Captain, I've had enough of cities and crowds. I will stay in the West, if you will let me. So Colter went to live among the Mandan people, promising, I'll be here when you come back. And more than one of his friends did go back later to visit him. Sacagawea and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, with their little son, who everyone called Pompey, went home to the Shoshone. Lewis and Clark told Sacagawea, if it were not for you, we would never have succeeded. Sacagawea replied, you showed me the great waters. We are friends. We helped each other. Setting off again, Lewis and Clark watched Sacagawea with her son in her arms, waving from the shore until a bend in the river hid them from sight. Months later, the travelers reached home. There they said their goodbyes and went their ways, some to more adventures and some to quieter lives. Perhaps you would like to know what happened to the 4 people who had been most responsible for the journey? Meriwether Lewis became governor of the entire Louisiana Territory. William Clark became the governor of Missouri, then spent much of the rest of his life working with Native Americans on behalf of the government's newly created Bureau of Indian Affairs. Thomas Jefferson continued as president until 1809. 8 years later, James Monroe, who had arranged for Jefferson to buy the Louisiana Territory, was himself elected president of the United States. So Jefferson was the president who bought the Louisiana Territory and hired Lewis and Clark to explore it. James Monroe was Jefferson's friend who traveled to France to buy New Orleans and the Louisiana Territory, and he became the president after Jefferson. And friends, that's where we end our lesson today. So let's look at what we've learned. So did Lewis and Clark reach the Pacific Ocean? Yeah. Did everyone in the read aloud make it back home safely? They did make it home safely, but some of them chose to stay in the Louisiana Territory. Why did Jefferson send Lewis and Clark to explore the Louisiana Territory? Because we didn't know what the Louisiana Territory was like, so he wanted us to find out. What were the 3 tasks Jefferson asked Lewis and Clark to complete? Make friends with the Native Americans, discover new plants and animals, and find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. Were Lewis and Clark able to accomplish all 3 tasks? Nope. Remember, they couldn't find the all-water route. So the tasks they were able to accomplish were making friends with Native Americans and to discover new plants and animals or record new plants and animals. They were not able to accomplish finding the all-water route. Do you think Lewis and Clark's expedition was a success? I think so. And I think it was because he discovered lots of new things. He found new plants and animals. He made friends with the Native Americans. They discovered what was in the Louisiana Territory and they got to see the Pacific Ocean. So I'd say that was a successful trip. All right, friends, it is your turn to go into Google Classroom, answer your questions, and then I will see you guys on our next lesson. Now, the next 3 days or the next few days, I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but the next few days, we're actually going to read a Magic Tree House book where Jack and Annie go and to the Great Plains during this time when Jefferson was discovering things. And Jack and Annie are going to discover a new Native American tribe called the Lakota. So we're going to read about them and for the next few lessons and see what things Jack and Annie get into. Okay. So friends, I will see you all later. Bye.